Good thing there's not like a live studio audience.
I know, right? That would be so much worse.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Please, would you introduce yourself to the people that are going to watch this later on? Because I already know your name.
Yeah, I'm Renée Minx. I am the IOP Director at Oasis Recovery. Yeah, I live here in Asheville. I'm a therapist, specialize in trauma, and a person in recovery myself.
Great. How long have you been in recovery now?
So I have been in recovery since August 5th of 2014. So in August of this year, it'll be 7 years.
Wow. Awesome. I think, I think it's really helpful. Obviously not totally necessary, but I think it's really helpful for people to work with people that are in recovery. You know what I mean? I think it helps them like have like some commonality, right? Mm-hmm. But I've seen people be really successful as therapists who have also not been, in recovery as well. But yeah, it's been really helpful for me in the past to work with other people that are in recovery when I was going through, some of my early, like newly sober stages. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? What was your path? Did you go to a treatment center as well when you first got clean?
Yeah, so I actually did not go to treatment.
Me neither. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what was helpful for me in not going to treatment was I didn't have that like family to fall back on, which I think was a good thing for me. I think that's the reason why I got sober at 21.
Okay.
Because I think if I did have, that support, I think I would have loved to have been enabled a little bit longer and live that life. But yeah, things just got really bad, and we can get more into the story later. But I ended up synchronicity meeting up with an old, my sister's best friend who lived with me at some point in my family when she was really bad and suicidal and in her alcoholism. And we just ran into each other, and my life was like absolutely horrible. I just casually was like, yeah, I'm just thinking about getting sober. And she was trying to get sober. So we moved in together and wanted to get sober, start fresh living together. But of course that didn't happen. It took a little bit of time. But I got sober just through the rooms of AA.
Me too.
12-step rooms.
Yeah, me too. It would have been nice to have like a jumping off point like Oasis. But yeah, I think that if I were, given... I don't know if even if given the choice though back then that I would have accepted that level of help for myself, which is so telling about the way that we see ourselves, Mm-hmm. I think on some level I would have thought like, oh, I don't deserve for, to go through something like that in order, like, with the financial commitment, with the commitment of time, like going away to from life or whatever, which is so... It just speaks so much to the stigma of addiction because so many people don't believe that it's a disease. They don't believe that, we feel like it was just a symptom of our bad choices, as opposed to something, that's treatable, that has a long history of clinical validity. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you bring up a good point. Like it's, looking back, I feel like, those people that do have the opportunity to come somewhere like Oasis and have that time and space to allow some perspective, to allow some therapy. I do think that, like, just looking back at my story, like it would have kind of helped some of the rough situations, like in the first year, for example.
Yeah.
So I think it is a privilege to be able to go to treatment, and those who have the opportunity and support.
So tell me a little bit more about like the end of your using, and because you're such like to me, like it's almost hard to imagine you being, in the same boat as me, but You know, I saw you recently share on social media that, like, you know, this is me, you know, like right before I recovered. And I was like, oh my gosh. You know what I mean? Like we're, we're like family, you know?
Yeah. Wow. I was thinking about that today, actually. I get that a lot. People are like, there's no way you ever, I
Yeah.
can't imagine you doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and I think partly that's a trauma response of like, you know, like this put together person who presents a certain way. And I think that I have cultivated that for a long time. So I think that somewhat presenting that way is a trauma response and not just, you know,
Wow.
me being perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the end of my using was horrible. My main things were like uppers and downers, mainly alcohol and Adderall, but pills and all of the rest. And for a while I thought like, you know, I was running away in high school and like the party girl. But I think that when I moved on to college, I started to experience some of the aftermath from my trauma growing up. And I kind of leaned a little bit more and more. I always had a addictive relationship with substances. It was almost like falling in love. Like I fell in love with them. Like the first time I had alcohol, first time I used substances, it was like, relief. Like this is everything I've been looking for. It's like safety.
Yeah.
And so, you know, towards the end of my using, it wasn't really fun anymore. It was so necessary for my life. It was like, you know, I would be in bed and I would have to like take pills in order for them to like wake me up and have motivation to go for the day. And, you know, then I would manage to go to class and I would do another substance in order to calm down from that upper. And then, you know, so in the process of uppers and downers continued all day until like drinking at night. And I think the turning point for me was my mental health, like my depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Like I couldn't deal with that anymore.
Right.
And I hit this breaking point where I had kind of memories of child sexual abuse, and it was just so much to where I just like stayed in bed for days and days, and I just really couldn't function. And luckily, like I had a person in my life, my roommate at the time, who was actually a random roommate. I kind of consider that she saved my life in some ways. She took me out of that environment, and like I was able to talk about everything with her, and she could relate to some of the abuse in her childhood. And so I think that gave me a lot of strength at the time when I was feeling like just so low. And, you know, it was this whole thing. I told my parents or my mom, and the perpetrator was my dad, and he was my primary caregiver. So it was really a tough situation. And I think something that I've learned now, like being on the other side of things, is that, I'm getting emotional, but that's okay. That it's normal, that a family does not believe the person. Something I've learned in my recovery is just like, it's okay to be with. So that was my experience at first, and it's changed since then.
They at first didn't believe you.
Yeah, and I think that, and I've seen it happen, and that's why I feel like being a therapist to me has been really healing, because I've been able to see people on the other side of it and them have a similar experience, but instead of like, you know, my early recovery journey and kind of having to piece everything together myself, like I'm able to look at my clients and be like, you know, I believe you.
Yeah.
And also give like the nerdy statistical side of things, which I love to like go that direction.
Yeah.
You know, it's very common that family members don't believe you, and it's because of, you know, their own guilt and maybe the gaslighting that has taken place. But that was a really hard, difficult time. And so I think that my using increased even more. And I just became really just isolated and frozen. Like I would say, like the trauma responses of fight, flight, freeze, and befriend, I became very frozen, which is in the trauma responses, frozen, freeze is the one that we have. Like if you imagine that it was back in the day and a saber-toothed tiger is coming towards me, my first response is to run, right? And if I can run away, like that's great. So that's flight. Then the tiger comes up to me, and if I can try to befriend the tiger, so that's like the people pleasing, that would be great. But if I can't, maybe I'll try to fight. And if I can't fight, then I'm going to freeze. And that's the human response before death, essentially.
Okay.
And so that's what a lot of folks who have experienced assault or war or any type of trauma, the freeze response is the most debilitating. And it takes a long time to move into freeze. And if we move into fight, like rage, that's great. It means like we're moving out of it. But I was frozen. And so, you know, like I mentioned earlier, when I ran into my friend, who was the only person I knew that ever tried to get in recovery, and I just casually said, like, I'm just thinking about getting sober. And my life was like falling apart internally and externally. And she agreed, like that was my first step. And of course it took some time after that. And
some trial and error, I'm sure.
Yeah, some trial and error.
Yeah.
A lot of trial. Yeah, and a lot of error. And, but yeah, the first time that she took me to an AA 12-step meeting, which was, I think, my only access point to recovery at that time, I've been sober ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, goodness gracious. Like, so the first time that I went to an AA meeting, a friend of mine, very dear friend of mine, reflected to me that he thought I had a serious problem. Very lovingly. He like nailed it, you know. I didn't feel attacked. I felt very seen, you know. He was like, you know, you may want to try this thing that my mom does, you know. And I was like, are you talking about AA? And I was like blown away, you know. And he was like, yeah. I mean, he had seen me use and drink like an animal, you know, just, you know, trash can drug intake, you know. And so when he suggested that I do that, you know, I was a little shocked, but I wasn't hurt because the way that he framed it was so helpful, you know. So I went, and I wish that I had stayed sober then, because I was like 21 years old. You know, it was already kind of like a serious problem. And I didn't, and I went in and out of the rooms for years. You know, I would go in for like 3 months at a time and be like, you know what? I'm good now. You know, that's what I needed. I just needed to press the reset button, you know. And, you know, I had to like get hit over the head with those phrases that we use over and over and over before they sank in. I'm a slow learner, you know. I'm really, what it is that I'm stubborn, you know. But well, I'm so glad that you and I get to share this together, you know. And you are like a fantastic, you know, clinician. You're just so gentle, and you've helped so many people coming through here. I imagine it's really cathartic, because it is for me when I get to help these guys, you know. When I see them, you know, the light bulb go off that, you know, life doesn't have to suck without drugs and alcohol. And I see that light bulb go off. I'm like, oh, hang on to that for dear life, you know, ladies and gentlemen, please, you know.
Yeah.
Did you, what was the decision to start helping people in this field of recovery? When did that happen? How far into your recovery?
Yeah. So I was a teacher, and that was what I was going to be in undergrad. And I actually made that decision in high school when I had a psychedelic experience. I'm like, perfect, I'm supposed to be a teacher. And so I just was like, okay, I'm going to trust this. And I realized that I didn't really want to be a teacher, that I cared more about what was happening at home with my students than why they showed up with behavioral health issues, and those were mainly the students I was working with. And so when I got sober, I didn't really know. It took me a while to figure out how I wanted to pursue that. And I quickly, after getting sober, just a few months, started like this ground up small project called Bears Share Care.
Okay.
And I remember I told my grandma, and she's like, it can't have Care Bear. They're going to sue you. And it was just this like small thing. It was so cute. But essentially, I wanted to just help survivors of abuse. Like that was the first kind of passion. And I created these little booklets and did research. And I ended up getting asked to do a TEDx talk on it. And I felt at that time, I'm like, I have really nothing to offer except for my own experience. And I've realized, telling our story and our experience is one of the most valuable ways that we can help others. So after moving from that, I wanted to maybe start a nonprofit. And I read a lot that it maybe wasn't the best to what's so called reinvent the wheel. So I'm like, okay, how can I go about this? Maybe I'll go back to school. And I wasn't that big of a fan of school, even though I'm a nerd. But I decided to go back to school to get my master's in social work. And I got into Chapel Hill, which was insane because I was like not into school in high school and just skipping. And so getting into a college that I thought was so prestigious was like, oh my gosh, I'm in recovery and I'm doing this. Like it felt really good. And I didn't know whether I wanted to go the path of macro or micro, and what that essentially means is like macro is like programming and starting programs and nonprofits, and micro is like working with individuals learning to be a therapist.
Yeah.
So I decided to learn to be a therapist. That way, if I wanted to do any programming, I could, but if I ever wanted to come back to be a therapist, I could.
Right. Yeah. More options, really.
Yeah. So that was kind of how the process went. And then I started working with folks as a therapist for the first time. And I just fell in love.
That's awesome. What else did you fall in love with in recovery? This is my big question that I ask everybody, because, we discover new passions and, like our life becomes really full. So what is it that you fell in love with? What did you become passionate about?
Oh my gosh. I'm passionate about so many things.
Me too.
I'm very, very passionate about therapy, about trauma healing. That's, what I'm probably most passionate about work-wise. But I've realized, so many new passions. Like I love working with horses, and I did some of that work myself, and not necessarily like equine therapy, but just learning natural horsemanship. And there's so much therapy in that.
Yeah.
I've done art here and there. I love traveling so much.
Yeah.
There's so many. I love hanging out with my friends and trying new things. I think something that happened when I was in active addiction is I kind of lost myself and I didn't know what I was into. If someone asked like, hey, what are your interests? I would have said, partying or having fun or using. I really couldn't have thought of anything else, but now I could talk for hours about the things that I love and the things I'm passionate about. And I think that's beautiful, that my life isn't so defined by one coping skill.
Yeah. No, I agree. And ultimately I felt the same exact way. When I first got clean, I had no idea what I enjoyed doing anymore, Like I was like, well, what do I do now? You're like sitting on your hands like, okay, don't do anything, don't do anything destructive. Don't drink over this. Like, I'm trying to figure out what it is that I love, I started trying new stuff almost like, religiously, like, well, okay, if I had an idea that I wanted to try something that I'd never done before, I was like, well, I'm going to do that then, I want to take Kung Fu. So I started taking Kung Fu, like maybe it was like I wanted to play with swords or something. I mean, this is just an example, which I did not, but well, now I kind of
Maybe
do.
You can.
Yeah. Now I kind of want to play with swords. But I started, giving myself the space to try this stuff that I, maybe had never tried before, or, I got really into science fiction, fantasy stuff. So I would read like science fiction fantasy novels. Like I got tired of doing that thing where I'm like forcing myself to read classic literature that I'm not interested at all in order to say, you know, look, I'm smart. You know what I'm saying? Instead, just being like, what do I actually enjoy? And then taking time to enjoy things for myself, like almost compassionately allowing myself to enjoy life. You know what I'm saying? Watching like a comic book movie, you know, by
Love
myself at
that.
the theater. Or like go to the theater and watch a movie that's like great and like no one's around you, like you're just by yourself, and then like you start crying like at the movie and you're just like so glad no one's there with you because you're just like just crying. But yeah, just, you know, life gets so much bigger, you know, than the little bedroom that we hung out in, you know, and like we end up making these great relationships with people, you know, like I was thinking about like all of those conversations that I had, you know, drunk and like high on like Coke when the sun's coming up and you're just like just miserable and you're just like, no, don't let the sun come up right now. And you realize that the conversation you're having is just like pointless. It's going nowhere, you know, and you're just like, these relationships are lacking substance, you know, for all of the substances.
Yeah, lots of substances, but lack of depth.
Yeah.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. I remember in early recovery, I'm like, I remember really feeling, what the hell am I going to do? Like, what do I do? I don't know what to do with my time, with my hands, with my energy, with my eye contact. Like, what do I do? And I remember like writing down with a crayon, someone else in recovery, like, number 1, we can run around circles and like dash lines in a tree. Like the things that we came up with were just so random, but it was because I had no concept of how to live my life and how to enjoy it without substances. Yeah. And I still remember that. And now knowing that, you know, I'm not terrified of alone time and I really crave it. And then I can do all these things that I love and enjoy. And it's not like, I'm just bored, or life is way more full than it was before. Yeah.
Have you ever gone scuba diving?
I haven't.
I don't know why, but I had an image of you scuba diving in my head just a moment ago. I just want to share that with you.
Well, maybe that's my future.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know what I saw the other day? It said, just because you are interested in something doesn't mean you need to turn it into a side hustle. And I was like, ooh. Because I can totally think like, ooh, I'm into art. Like maybe I can like sell it on Facebook Marketplace, or maybe I'm in this like pottery. And so I liked it, like made me turn inward, and it's like, you know, maybe I can just do some things that I love to do just for the pure enjoyment of doing them. Yeah.
I think too, like if you're interested in, you know, making side hustles, like if you want to make more money and you just like have that intention, that will happen for you. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't need to think really hard about what that side hustle is going to be. If that's my intention, if that's like I have my antenna for it, I'll know when it's time to turn something into a side hustle. You know what I mean? It'll happen.
Yeah, but your intention is, you know, the enjoyment of it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I know, because I have that same thing where it's like, oh, I'm really into jujitsu. Maybe I could start like teaching, you know, I'm a blue belt. I'm not going to teach anybody jujitsu. Or like, oh, I'm going to start teaching guitar lessons. I would hate that. Just like sitting there, like watching someone, just put your finger right there. Gosh, do I have another question? Yeah, this is one that I was going to be asking more frequently, and I've kind of like fallen off of it just out of curiosity, because obviously there's no right or wrong answer to this question. But do you believe in God?
That's so crazy that you asked that. That's so crazy you asked. I was thinking about that just this morning. I'm like, I wonder if I'll talk about God. Yeah, I have had a super complicated relationship with that word. Yeah. You know, with my experience of past abuse and like all types of abuse, which is a huge part of my story, I felt very abandoned by what may have been a God. And when I first joined 12-step, there, you know, I learned like the Lord's Prayer for the first time and all these things. Like I had never been to church, and and I started to come to believe, like I just started to open up the possibility that it was possible. Yeah. And I think one of the main things that helped me was knowing the times that I should have and could have died in active substance use when I was very dangerous, and feeling like protected, which is the opposite feeling of abandoned, which I felt before. So, and I felt very happy during that time. Like I noticed the synchronicities of life, and that's a really good energy for me. Like thinking of a song and then turning on the car and that song's playing in the exact part I was thinking it. Like when I can notice those things and be searching for those things, life seems magical.
Yeah.
And then there are long periods of time where I go back into feeling stupid for believing in something bigger than myself and questioning it and my scientific mind. And it's hard for me to stay with the connection, but just the past 2 days or 3 days, I've been connecting again because I felt really kind of low a few days ago, and that's the perfect time for me to reach out when I feel like I have nothing outside of myself that can make me feel better. And I just imagine like giving everything that I was struggling with, like giving it over to like the universe or God, and I felt peace instantly.
Yes, love that.
So I've been into that more recently, and it ebbs and flows. But when it flows, it feels really good.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, it does ebb and flow, though, I think, almost like naturally. It's almost like, if this thing that I don't mind calling God is real, then it comes in waves and I mean, so does life in general, right? But yeah, there are times when I feel so connected to whatever that thing is. And I feel like it's like dancing with me cheek to cheek and, like embracing me. Mm. And I think that the times where I get disconnected from it, it's not that it has chosen to disconnect from me, but rather that I have gotten wrapped up in my, existence, my day-to-day, paying my bills type stuff. Mm-hmm. And that stuff's real and it's necessary, you know what I mean? But I'd like to make a conscious effort to dance more often, cheek to cheek. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because when I do the right thing and when I try to listen for the inspiration to do those right things, and I'm looking for those synchronicities, like you said, it does feel really good. But it also like the feeling for me is like a feeling of correctness almost, that like I'm doing it right today.
Aligned.
Yeah, I'm aligned. Exactly.
Yeah. It's, I can relate to that. Like this morning, just, and because I do kind of get out of alignment and in alignment, and I felt like I've been in alignment just the past, 4 days or so. But this morning I remember thinking right before I woke up, I'm like, I saw the time like 6:59, and it was like the, clock was ticking, and I woke up and looked at my clock, and it was that exact time. And so it just like something like that puts me at ease. It's like, okay, because I can often question, like, am I doing the right thing at the right time?
Right.
I have all these motivations and passions similar to you. Like I have this huge force pushing me forward. And so sometimes I feel like I can try to force things before it's the time for me.
Yeah.
And so I would love that guidance of like, hey, Renee, like you are where you're supposed to be, and it'll be very obvious when a change is supposed to happen. Right. Or and so when I can be in alignment, I can have that trust, and when I'm out of alignment, I can be in questioning, either trying to rush something or not act on something that right. Yeah, either of them.
Yeah, I had this really cool moment of alignment today walking into work where I was anxious about something, and I know exactly what it was. I was walking into work thinking, like, I love this job so much, I hope I never lose it. And then I had this, like, realization, one that I've had many times, but for some reason I don't always have access to this truth, is that I'm going to be okay, that I'm doing a good job, and I'll do the best job that I can while I'm here, and I'll impact as many people as I'm supposed to impact. And then, when and if the chapter is concluded, I'll do the next thing just the same way. You know what I mean? I will always be okay no matter what washed over me. And it was such a I'm like, why don't I think this more often? Why don't I just allow myself a sip of that I'll be okay no matter what juice as often as possible? Why am I not doing that?
Please, just get me access to that.
Yeah.
Oh, that peace.
Yeah. Gosh, what a lovely conversation, for a Wednesday morning.
Yeah, I appreciate your time and your questions and what you're doing.
It's Thursday.
Oh my gosh. I never know what day of the week it is. So
Who needs
we're on
it?
the same page.
Who needs it?
If we're aligned, it can be any day that we want.
Exactly. It's going to be okay no matter what.
Yeah.
Well, Renee, thank you so much for doing this with me. And, it's been a pleasure working here with you, and to many more days.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Cheers.